Steven Seagal sat quietly in first class as the aircraft prepared for departure. Daytime light streamed through the windows and the cabin felt calm and polished. Passengers settled in expecting a smooth luxury flight. Steven looked over the first-class menu. It listed premium meals reserved for top-tier passengers. He waited patiently until a flight attendant approached. With a calm voice he placed his order. "I would like the luxury meal, please." The attendant glanced at him from head to toe. Her smile faded. She let out a small laugh that carried across the aisle. "That option is not for you. We save that for real first-class guests." A few nearby passengers looked up. Some exchanged awkward glances. Others leaned back pretending not to notice. Steven remained composed. No argument. No raised voice. No anger on his face. He calmly repeated his request and showed his boarding pass. First-class seat clearly printed. Row confirmed. The attendant shook her head. "I decide who gets premium service. You can take the standard meal or nothing." The laughter around her grew louder. Another crew member joined and smirked. The moment turned uncomfortable. Steven closed the menu and rested his hands on his lap. He looked straight ahead as if nothing had happened. Silence replaced the tension. Most people assumed this was the end of it. Just another passenger dismissed by power-hungry staff. Just another quiet humiliation at 30,000 feet. But something felt different. Steven did not complain. He did not call for a supervisor. He did not defend himself. He simply waited. 10 minutes passed. The engines roared louder as the plane reached cruising altitude. Cabin lights dimmed slightly. Then the cockpit door opened. What happened next would change the mood of the entire flight. Whispers turned into shock. Smiles vanished from the crew. Because in that moment the laughter stopped. The arrogance disappeared. And the truth finally walked down the aisle. 10 minutes after denying a simple meal, the entire cabin crew realized one thing. They had just disrespected the wrong man. It was a bright daytime flight from Los Angeles to New York. Sunlight poured through the large windows as the aircraft cruised smoothly above the clouds. The first-class cabin felt calm, quiet, and comfortable. Soft music played in the background and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the aisle. Passengers in first class appeared relaxed. Some scrolled on their phones. Others sipped drinks and chatted softly. Everything about the space reflected status, comfort, and privilege. Steven Seagal sat alone near the window. He wore simple clothes. A plain jacket. No designer labels. No flashy accessories. There were no assistants beside him. No bodyguards standing nearby. No one paying him special attention. To most people in the cabin he looked like an ordinary traveler. Just another quiet man passing time on a long flight. A flight attendant pushing a service cart slowed as she passed his seat. Her eyes moved quickly from his shoes to his jacket. She paused for a moment then leaned toward another attendant. "He does not look like first-class material." The second attendant glanced over and nodded. They shared a look that carried judgment without a single word spoken aloud. Service began for first-class passengers. Trays were prepared carefully. Luxury meals were announced with polished smiles. Names were remembered. Preferences were praised. When the attendant reached Steven, she barely hid her hesitation. Her voice sounded polite but cold. Steven opened the menu calmly. He read through the options without hurry. He waited until she looked at him again. "I would like the premium meal listed here." The attendant raised an eyebrow. She did not check her tablet. She did not confirm his seat. "This is reserved for elite passengers." Her tone carried certainty as if the decision had already been made. Steven looked up slowly, still calm, still respectful. "I am seated in first class." She glanced at his seat number but did not change her expression. Rules seemed flexible when power was involved. And power in her eyes came from appearance, not entitlement. Around them other passengers listened quietly. Some pretended to focus on their screens. Others watched with interest. No one spoke up. No one questioned her words. Steven did not raise his voice. He did not challenge her authority. He simply nodded as if absorbing the moment. The attendant moved on, serving others around him. Smiling. Laughing. Offering choices with warmth. Steven remained untouched by the service. His tray stayed empty. The judgment had already been delivered. Not through rules. Not through policy. But through perception. This was not about food. It was about respect. And the quiet assumptions people make when they believe no consequences will follow. Steven leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Clouds drifted slowly below. The cabin noise faded into the background. He waited. Not in anger. Not in embarrassment. But with patience. Because some lessons do not need words. They need timing. Comment below if you have ever been judged by your appearance. Steven calmly reached into his pocket and took out his boarding pass. He held it up without attitude, without frustration. The seat number was clear. First class confirmed. Everything printed officially. The flight attendant glanced at it for barely a second. She did not scan it. She did not apologize. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "We decide who gets special service." Her words were sharp and dismissive. Not loud but strong enough for nearby passengers to hear. Steven slowly lowered the boarding pass. His expression did not change. His posture remained relaxed. Another crew member stepped closer. She looked at Steven and then at her colleague. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. "So now everyone thinks they deserve luxury." The two attendants exchanged looks. The kind that signals permission. Permission to mock. Permission to humiliate. Passengers began to notice. A man across the aisle stopped typing on his laptop. A woman removed her headphones. Eyes turned toward the scene. No one intervened. No one defended him. The power dynamic was clear. Uniforms versus silence. Steven listened without interruption. He did not defend himself. He did not explain who he was. He did not demand respect. He simply looked at the attendants and spoke softly. "No problem, I will wait." The words were calm, almost gentle. That response seemed to confuse them. There was no anger to react to. No argument to escalate. One attendant scoffed. "Suit yourself." They moved on, laughing quietly, serving other passengers with bright smiles. Steven was skipped again. His tray still empty. His space untouched. The conflict was no longer about a meal. It had become a public display of dominance. The attendants walked past him repeatedly, each time avoiding eye contact, each time making the message clearer: you do not belong. Passengers watched in silence. Some felt uncomfortable. Others felt entertained. Phones were subtly lifted. Cameras angled discreetly. Steven remained still, hands folded, eyes forward. Inside the cabin, tension thickened. Every laugh from the crew felt louder. Every ignored glance felt heavier. A young passenger whispered, "That was rude." Another replied, "He should complain." But Steven did neither. He understood something they did not. Power does not rush. Power waits. Minutes passed. The service continued. The plane climbed higher. The attendants assumed victory. In their minds, this man was finished, dismissed, put in his place. They had no idea they were being observed. Not by passengers, but by timing. Steven leaned back and closed his eyes. Not in defeat, but in patience. Because real authority does not announce itself. It reveals itself. And when it does, it changes everything. The conflict sat quietly in the cabin. Unresolved, unspoken, waiting. Just like Steven did, the crew no longer tried to hide their behavior. They openly ignored Steven as they moved through the cabin. Trays were placed carefully on seats beside him. Warm smiles were offered to passengers around him. His seat was skipped every time. The service cart rolled past him again and again. Drinks were poured. Meals were explained. Laughter floated through the aisle. Steven remained invisible. One attendant slowed near his row and leaned toward another. Her voice was not quiet this time. It was loud enough to carry. People like him always try to act rich. A few passengers gasped softly. Others looked down, pretending they had not heard. Steven heard it clearly. He did not react. He did not look up. But the atmosphere changed. The calm luxury of first class began to crack. The air felt heavy, uncomfortable. A businessman across the aisle shifted in his seat. A woman near the window frowned. Eyes moved back and forth between Steven and the crew. This was no longer subtle disrespect. It was public humiliation. The attendants continued their service with exaggerated enthusiasm, complimenting watches, praising handbags, calling passengers by name. Each interaction felt intentional. Each laugh felt pointed. Steven sat still. His calm became unsettling. Some passengers expected him to explode, to demand a supervisor, to raise his voice. He did none of it. That silence made the moment louder. Phones slowly came out. Not obvious, not dramatic, just enough to record. A screen lit up, then another. People sensed something was wrong. Not just rude service, but abuse of power. The attendant who had whispered earlier noticed the phones. Her smile tightened. She straightened her posture. Still, she did not correct her behavior. Instead, she doubled down. She passed Steven once more and said loudly, "Some people buy first-class seats but cannot buy class." A few passengers exchanged looks. This time someone shook their head. The tension climbed higher than the plane itself. Steven finally opened his eyes and looked around the cabin. Not angry. Not offended. Where? He noticed the recording phones. The stiff smiles of the crew. The unease spreading through first class. This had gone too far. And everyone felt it. The attendants believed they were in control. They believed uniforms protected them. They believed the man in simple clothes was powerless. They did not know that moments like this reveal more than faces. They reveal character. Steven rested his hands on the armrests. He took a slow breath. Still no complaint. Still no confrontation. That restraint unsettled the crew more than anger ever could. Because escalation does not always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from waiting. The cabin had become divided. Those who watched. Those who judged. Those who recorded. And one man who stayed silent. The attendants continued moving up the aisle. But now their laughter sounded forced. Their confidence thinner. They could feel it. Something was coming. The tension hung in the air like a held breath. Every passenger sensed that this moment was not over. It was only building. 10 minutes passed in uneasy silence. The plane cruised smoothly above the clouds. Service carts were parked. Whispers replaced laughter. Then the cockpit door opened. The sound was soft but every head turned. The captain stepped into the aisle. Straight posture, calm expression, full uniform. He did not look around. He did not scan the cabin. He walked straight toward Steven. His step felt heavy. Each second stretched. Passengers watched closely. Phones rose a little higher. The captain stopped beside Steven's seat. He smiled respectfully and slightly bowed his head. "Sir, welcome aboard, Mr. Seagal." The cabin froze. Breath stopped. Eyes widened. Time paused. The flight attendants stood still. Color drained from their faces. One gripped the service cart tightly. Steven looked up calmly. He nodded once. "Thank you, Captain." The captain turned toward the cabin. His voice carried authority and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have the airline owner flying with us today." Silence exploded into shock. Mouths dropped open. Passengers stared at Steven. Then at the crew. The phones were no longer hidden. They were raised openly. One attendant stepped back. Another whispered no under her breath. Moments earlier they had laughed. Now they could barely stand. Steven remained seated. Composed. Unchanged. The captain continued speaking. "Mr. Seagal prefers to travel quietly without special attention. We appreciate your respect." Respect. The word cut through the cabin like a blade. The attendants understood instantly. Every look. Every whisper. Every insult replayed in their minds. One of them swallowed hard. Another avoided eye contact. Passengers murmured softly. Some shook their heads. Some smiled knowingly. Steven slowly stood up. Not to intimidate. Not to boast. Simply to speak. "I boarded this flight as a passenger. I was treated as less than one." His voice was calm but firm. This was never about a meal. It was about how easily respect disappears. The cabin remained silent. Steven turned slightly toward the crew. Power does not give permission to humiliate. The attendants stood frozen. No excuses were offered. No apologies came out. They knew. The captain nodded respectfully. Steven sat back down. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand anything. That made it worse. Because consequences do not need noise. The tension was unbearable. Passengers leaned forward waiting. Waiting for the decision. What should happen next? Fire or forgive? Comment. Now Steven stood calmly in the aisle. No anger showed on his face. No triumph in his posture. He did not raise his voice. He did not point fingers. He simply asked for a full report. Every interaction. Every decision. Every word spoken during the flight. The captain nodded immediately. The request was clear. And final. The flight continued in near silence. The cabin felt different now. Heavy. Reflective. The attendants who had laughed earlier avoided the aisle. Their confidence had vanished. Their steps were slow. Measured. Passengers whispered quietly. Not out of excitement. But discomfort. Steven returned to his seat. He waited again. Just as he had before. Only now everyone understood why. When the plane landed, the doors opened to a different reality. Airport staff waited at the gate. Supervisors stood ready. The disrespectful crew was asked to step aside. No shouting. No drama. Just procedure. One by one they were escorted away. Faces pale. Heads down. New staff replaced them immediately. Professional. Calm. Respectful. They approached Steven with quiet courtesy. Not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Steven did not celebrate. He did not watch them leave. He simply stood and spoke one final time. Luxury means nothing without respect. The words echoed through the cabin. Passengers listened carefully. Some nodded. Some looked ashamed. This was not revenge. It was correction. Steven thanked the captain. He thanked the remaining crew. Then he walked off the plane quietly. No cameras followed him. No applause broke out. But something had changed. The lesson stayed behind. Respect is not optional. It is not selective. It is not earned through clothes or titles. It is shown by default. The flight ended. But the message traveled far beyond the runway. Power does not roar. It corrects. And dignity does not demand attention. It commands it. Never judge someone by their clothes. Clothes can hide wealth. They can hide power. They can hide authority. But they can never hide character. Power does not need to shout. It does not argue. It does not explain itself to feel important. Real power stays calm. It observes. It waits. Respect should be standard, not selective. It should not depend on money. It should not depend on appearance. It should not depend on status or title. The moment you treat someone differently based on how they look, you reveal more about yourself than about them. In that cabin, the mistake was not refusing a meal. The mistake was assuming value. The mistake was believing authority comes from uniform alone. Everyone will face a moment like this in life. A moment where they think they are untouchable. A moment where they believe no one is watching. That is when character shows. Steven did not raise his voice. He did not embarrass anyone publicly. He did not seek revenge. He allowed the truth to speak for itself. And that is the strongest lesson of all. You do not need to prove who you are. Time does it for you. Some people laugh when they feel superior. Others stay silent because they know who they are. Choose wisely which one you become. Because positions change. Uniforms come off. Titles disappear. But how you treat people stays remembered. The world does not reward arrogance forever. It corrects it eventually. Respect given freely returns multiplied. Respect denied returns as regret. This story is not about a celebrity. It is about behavior. It is about everyday choices. The waiter you ignore. The passenger you judge. The stranger you dismiss. You never know who they are. And more importantly, you never know who you are becoming in that moment. Stay humble. Stay kind. Stay aware. Because true class is invisible. And real strength is quiet. Type respect if you believe character matters more than status. And tell me where you are watching from.